Because we talk about the importance of having a second citizenship or even an entire portfolio of passports to diversify yourself and to protect yourself, I've created a system a number of years ago where we grouped every passport into one of three tiers. And we've made a few caveats for that over the years, but basically three different tiers of passports in terms of travel documents, the actual passport itself, not the citizenship, but the passport. This is especially important for Western citizens who want to make sure that they're getting a halfway decent second passport. If you are not a Western citizen, you've got a rather average passport, this can be important because you want to expand your travel privileges. And so what I'm going to do today is walk you through the updated three-tier approach and what you need to know. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you want the ultimate guide on all the different ways to get a second citizenship, all the reasons why you need to be a dual citizen, click on the link in the description. We've got an article on nomadcapitalist.com where you can read basically everything you need to know about second passports, and you can also find out how we help people get second passports with more options than probably anyone else out there. But let's talk about the three tiers of second passports that are out there. Now, what I've said before is travel privileges shouldn't be the only thing you look at when you look at a passport. You should look at the freedom of the country, the financial and tax policies of the country, whether or not you want to live there, and you should really evaluate your needs. Is this just a backup passport? Is it a way to protect yourself from changing tax policies in your country? Is it a way to open yourself up to new investments? Is it a way to travel to new places or to travel to places with a more neutral passport than the one you have, if say you're American or Israeli, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different reasons people would want passports, and I think that the industry does a disservice by only focusing on that one number of where you can travel. What we did with the Nomad Passport Index, which got featured by Bloomberg and CNN and lots of other places, was say a citizenship should be graded on all the different requirements and all the different benefits that come from citizenship. One of those benefits is the passport, okay? So before we get started, I want to make that clear because I don't think you should just go out and focus on, well, I'm a Canadian and I can pretty much travel wherever I want, so why do I need a second passport? You're getting a second passport. If you're the 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur or investor that we're talking to, you're getting a second passport to diversify, again, to open up your investment options, to protect yourself against changing draconian tax laws. If you're an American, you already have those in your country. That's what you're getting this for, okay? And so why the tiers matter are, if you are an American and perhaps you want to expatriate from the United States, you probably don't want to go from having one of the world's best travel documents to a really bad one, right? You don't want to suddenly see yourself unwelcome at the borders of many different countries and needing to get a visa. And if you're in another category, if you don't have a very good passport, you might want a better one. If you're a Canadian or Australian and you're getting a second passport as an insurance policy, a citizenship insurance, then you might ask yourself, well, what if I ever have to get rid of this passport 20 years from now? What am I replacing it with? Okay, here are the three tiers. There's tier A, tier B, tier C. Very straightforward. Okay, and what we've historically said was, tier A is the passport of a country that has a visa waiver program access to the United States. There's about 40 countries that have that, and you can throw in Canada too. They don't technically have it, but they can visit the United States without a visa. So 40 countries out of more than 200 countries and territories that issue passports, those are the ones that can go to the United States. With that, you'll often, but not always, get visa-free access to the other CUNA countries, Canada, the US, New Zealand, and Australia, with Canada and New Zealand sometimes being a little bit easier. Actually, Australia is even more difficult than the United States, but I figured the United States, because Americans are the ones who are potentially renouncing, not Australians, and because more people want to go to the US than they want to go to Australia, I just figured the US was the best benchmark to use. And they are sufficiently difficult as a country to get into. Not most countries don't have visa-free access to the United States, and getting a visa there is relatively difficult. So that's tier A, okay? Now, there are some countries whose passports will get you into a handful of the CUNA countries. The Solomon Islands talked about a citizenship by investment program. They have visa-free access to Canada. We'll see how long that lasts if they start a citizenship by investment program. That is the only one of the CUNA countries I believe they have access to. Other countries like Vanuatu has a citizenship program. What most people don't know is they have visa-free transit through Australia and New Zealand. So if you're flying from Vanuatu to somewhere else, let's say in Asia, you can fly through Australia, but you can't go in. it's worth something, but not full boat, okay? And so those are basically the tier A countries. Sometimes they'll say, oh, this country is tier A minus. You'll take a country like a Brazil, for example, or an Argentina, where you can go to pretty much everywhere in the world, and really the United States and sometimes Canada are like the only ones that you can't go to. Sometimes Australia, okay? So there are some really good passports. Israel, for example. You can go to a lot of countries, including some countries that Westerners can't. You can go to Canada, you can go to New Zealand. US and Australia are off limits, and so that's an A minus passport. So tier A is US access, something that's pretty similar, in that vicinity could be an A minus. Tier A passports are basically going to be the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, Brunei, most European Union countries. Poland recently got visa waiver program access to the US, so it's now a solid A tier A passport. Chile. That's pretty much it. You've got some solid B plus candidates, which we'll get into in a moment. But if you're looking to get a tier A passport, and I frequently talk to people who are Americans, they're high net worth individuals, they're considering expatriating from the US, they don't want to lose any travel options at all. They want to be able to go to Canada, US, whatever, whenever they want. Those passports are hard to come by. And it's hard to be naturalized in those countries if you're concerned about paying high tax. If you're a high earner, you're going to pay a boatload of tax living in Belgium, for example, for 5 or 6 years. And so you're going to be looking at some kind of fast-track passport or citizenship by investment. Or you're going to have to rely on the 1 or 2 countries that have pretty favorable tax policies, and they're more difficult to get into and more difficult to keep up with. So tier A passports, rather hard to come by unless you have one in your family tree. If your father's Canadian, if your mother was German, if your grandfather was Irish, you can get one. Otherwise, get ready to spend some money if you are a high earner. That's tier A, US access. A minus is similar, but maybe one country missing. Tier B, what we've said is you have access to Europe. And we've historically defined that as the Schengen area. Now, what we've seen over the recent years, most recently with the coronavirus situation, but before there were other run-ins, is as the European Union, as the Schengen area has expanded, you've seen a few countries saying, we're going to put up borders for this or for that certain times. And it's been hard for Europe to control that. And so, essentially, I do think you'll continue to see some kind of borderless movement in Europe. Certainly, it is looking more fractured than it has been in recent years. But if the Schengen area were to go away, if this borderless travel zone where you can fly into Spain and then move all across basically the European continent, if that were to go away, then we would define tier B as having access to most of the countries in Europe. And so, just as you're seeing the UK passport with Brexit, you're not going to have freedom of movement in the EU eventually. You'll still have access to the EU. You'll still have access to the Schengen area. It just won't be on quite the same terms. And so, if the Schengen area goes away and you're an American or you're a Canadian, it'll be like it was when I went to Europe in the early 90s as a kid. You go to Portugal, you get stamped. You get your Portuguese escudos. Then you go to Spain, you get your Spanish stamp. And so you're just going from place to place to place. And so, a country that had access to most of those European countries would still be a tier B passport. But for now, if your country has a visa waiver program to the Schengen countries, or just a visa waiver, then I would call that tier B. I'm not including the UK, and I'm not including Ireland in tier B because those are separate countries, and they're more difficult to get into. Lots of countries like the Western Balkans, a lot of countries in the South Pacific, Georgia and the Caucasus, a number of South American countries have access to Europe, the Schengen area, because the requirements are more straightforward, but they cannot go without a visa to the UK or Ireland. So if you can go to the UK, then I would call that a B plus. It's B because you have Europe, but it's plus, right? Because the UK is not as difficult to get into as the US, but it's more difficult than Europe. So that's tier B, okay? And so the philosophy here is that if you can go to the US or if you can go to Europe, most people, they're happy with either one of those. Some people do certainly require or want both. But, if you can go all over Europe, certainly tier B passports generally have decent visa-free travel, at least to certain parts of the world. So, Eastern European passports have decent access, all around Central Asia and Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. Other passports have excellent access to South America, the Caribbean citizenship by investment programs. Some of them have literally, one of them has access to literally every country in Europe. and every country in South America, right? That's a pretty solid tier B or B plus passport. So if you have access to Europe, it probably means other countries have taken notice as well, and you have some decent amount of visa-free travel. Now, tier C is you don't have either of those. You don't have US, you don't have Schengen. This would be pretty much every African passport outside of Seychelles and Mauritius. It would be a number of Asian passports, like the Thailands and Vietnams of the world. It would be a couple countries in South America. There aren't that many tier C passports. In fact, a lot of countries that people think would be tier C are not. El Salvador, the poorest country on mainland North and Central America, is a solid B plus passport. You got a lot of travel as a Salvadorian. Okay, so there's a lot of countries you would think would be tier C that actually aren't. So the exceptions that stand out to me as decent tier C passports would be Turkey and Russia, and I would call these C plus, in that these countries have such size and they have enough relations all over the world that they have been able to get decent visa-free travel. Both countries have come from the doldrums 15 years ago to have decent visa-free travel, except to the US and the EU. And so that's largely political. But if you're a Russian, you've got a pretty good passport for traveling anywhere but the West. You want to go all over Asia, you want to go literally all over South America, the Caribbean, parts of Africa, Central Asia, Eastern Europe. It's a breeze, and you're very welcome in many of those places. Turks are somewhat similar. And then you have the tier C passports that are just, terrible. We have friends who are Egyptian, who are Moroccan. Those aren't the worst. They can still go to some countries, but you're going to be limited to 40 or 50 different countries visa-free, and a lot of those are pretty far-flung places, or little islands or whatever. And so tier C doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but most of them are very limited in terms of their travel privileges. And so those are a lot of the folks that are historically looking for second citizenship. A lot of the wealthy Middle Eastern countries actually have this. Qatar's passport, despite how wealthy they are, by some metrics, the wealthiest country on earth, not a great passport. Bahrain, Kuwait. The UAE now has a very solid A- passport. The rest of the Gulf countries, not that great. So it doesn't even matter, necessarily what your socioeconomic status is. I mean, an El Salvador passport, much better than a Qatari passport, despite the huge disparity in wealth between those countries. And so again, politics sometimes plays a role, which is why I like to have multiple citizenships, because I never want the politics of one country to define where I can go, how I can invest, how I'm going to run my business, etc. And so those are the three tiers of citizenship: tier A, tier B, tier C. If you have a tier A citizenship and you plan on keeping it, then sometimes it's not a bad idea to get a tier C passport. There are some tier C passports that I think will become B in the future. There are some that are, kind of like mediocre Bs that I think will become pretty solid Bs. And I've watched a number of passports. Serbia has been one that's been an amazing performer. Georgia has actually done pretty well. Those are just two countries that we talk about here on our channel frequently. Their passports have dramatically improved. A lot of passports have dramatically improved over the years. As I said, Russia was another one. Still doesn't have that access to the West. But a lot of passports that are now are improving. Ukraine recently got access to the Schengen area. And so could some of these things change? Yes. Obviously, if there's a huge amount of chaos around the world, I'd rather have a Canadian passport than a Serbian passport in terms of keeping visa-free travel. But again, if I already have a very good passport and I plan on keeping it, I'm probably going to look to a more affordable, easier to get, potentially faster, and complementary passport that's an average B or even a C, because I'm going to open up potentially new countries that I can go to because there are different alliances. Maybe I'll get visa-free access to Russia or China if I get a lesser quality passport. Maybe I'll just have a country's passport where they're going to leave me alone because it's a small country. They don't bother their citizens living overseas, right? That can be a good thing. And so I've often told, again, Brits and Canadians and Australians, just get a lower quality passport as an insurance policy. It'll probably appreciate in value over time, and you won't have much maintenance to do in the meantime. So A, B, and C, understand what you're getting, and also understand what role that plays in why you're getting a second passport in the first place. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, Get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.